You'll never find better than me." He said it with a smirk, right there in front of everyone. The man she had loved for 3 years, the man she had believed in, managed for, quietly sacrificed for, looked her in the eye and said it like it was a favor. Like reminding her of her own limitations was an act of kindness. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not breaking. Something colder than that. Something final. She burned his letter the next morning. And 3 weeks later, she married the most respected man in America.
Get the bomb.
If that just hit something in you, subscribe right now, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. Now let's begin. Clara Bennett had never been the kind of woman who made scenes. That was the first thing people said about her when they were being complimentary, and the first thing they used against her when they weren't. Clara is so composed. Clara never makes a fuss. Clara handles things so quietly. She had heard it her whole life in the way people said things they meant as praise, but which were really just relief. Relief that she was not going to be difficult, not going to demand attention, not going to require the kind of emotional management that inconvenienced the people around her. She was 24 years old, the eldest daughter of a Virginia family that had once been prosperous and was now carefully, quietly, not in the way that families declined when the money ran slower each year and the land stayed the same size, and nobody said anything out loud because saying it out loud would make it real. She had managed the household accounts since she was 17. She had managed her mother's anxiety, her father's pride, her younger sister's social calendar, and the particular complex arithmetic of maintaining appearances on a reduced income for 7 years. She had also, for 3 of those 7 years, managed the belief that Edward Whitmore loved her. That belief had arrived in her life the way a lot of comfortable things arrived, gradually, pleasantly, with just enough confirmation to keep it alive. Edward had been attentive. Edward had been charming. Edward had said things in the particular low voice men used when they wanted to be believed, and she had believed them because she was not a fool, but she was human, and humans needed to be believed in sometimes, and she had confused his need to be believed for the genuine thing. She understood that now. She understood it standing at the fireplace with ash on her fingers and 3 years of careful hope turning to smoke. A man must choose a future, not a memory. She read it once, which was enough because Clara Bennett had always processed things quickly and completely, and she did not need to read a sentence twice to understand what it was designed to do. It was designed to make her feel small. It was designed to reframe 3 years of his attention as her misunderstanding, to make the problem her expectations rather than his character. He was not abandoning her. He was making a practical choice. He was choosing a future. As if she were a thing that existed only in the past. As if she were already over. She dropped the letter in the fire. She watched it catch. She said nothing. Her mother, sitting across the room with her embroidery and the particular tension of a woman who had been waiting for something bad and could feel it arriving, looked up. "Clara," her mother said. "I'm going to the Whitmore summer party tonight," Clara said. Her mother put down the embroidery. "Clara, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Clara said. "I'm going anyway." Her mother looked at her face for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "What did the letter say?" "Nothing important," Clara said. Which was the truest thing she could have said. Nothing in that letter had been important. Not the words, not the reasoning, not the careful framing of his convenience as her inevitability. None of it had been important. What was important was what she was going to do next. She dressed carefully. This was not vanity. This was strategy. And Clara Bennett had always understood the difference, even when the people around her had not. She wore the blue dress, not her finest, but the one that fit her best, the one in which she stood straight without trying, and walked without adjusting herself to accommodate the fabric. She did her hair the way her mother had taught her, and pinned it with the 2 silver pins that had been her grandmother's, which were modest but real, which was more than could be said for a great deal of what would be in that room tonight. She looked at herself in the glass. She looked like a woman who had burned a letter and come out the other side of it. She looked like a woman who had nothing to prove and had decided to prove it anyway. She went to the party. The Whitmore estate in summer was exactly what it was designed to be. An argument for the importance of the Whitmore family made in brick and flower arrangements and the quality of the wine. Edward's father had built it to impress, and it impressed, and everyone who attended the summer party understood that their attendance was itself a form of tribute. Clara had attended for 3 years. This was the last time. She walked in at 8 o'clock, which was exactly the right time. Not early, which would have suggested eagerness, and not late, which would have suggested either social importance or distress. 8 o'clock was the time of a woman who had decided to attend and had done so at her own convenience. The first person she saw was Margaret Croft, who had the kind of face that immediately revealed its owner's thoughts, and whose thoughts when she saw Clara went through surprise pity and social calculation in approximately 2 seconds. "Clara," Margaret said, "I didn't expect." "Good evening, Margaret," Clara said warmly. "Your dress is lovely." She kept moving. She greeted the people she knew, accepted a glass of punch she didn't intend to drink, and moved through the room with the particular calm of someone who knew exactly where she was going and was in no hurry to get there, because the getting there was not actually the point. She felt the room's awareness of her. It was the specific awareness of people who knew something she was supposed to know and were watching to see how she was handling it. She registered it the way she registered most things fully, without letting the registration show on her face. She had been managing other people's discomfort her whole life. She could manage a room full of it for one evening. She had been there for 40 minutes when Edward found her. She knew he would. She had known it the moment she decided to come that Edward, who could not tolerate being ignored, and could not tolerate being outdone, and could not tolerate any narrative he didn't control, would find her and say something. She had not known exactly what, but she had known the shape of it. Something that reasserted his authority over the situation, something that reminded everyone watching that he was the one who had made a choice, and she was the one who had not been chosen. He came across the room with the confidence of a man on his own territory. He was handsome. She had always known that, and she knew it now looking at him with eyes that had been cleaned of everything that used to soften the seeing. He was handsome the way certain pieces of furniture were handsome, well made, impressive in a room, and completely without warmth. "Clara," he said, and his voice had the particular quality that it always had when he was performing, before an audience slightly louder than necessary, with a warmth that was pitched for the people around them rather than for her. "I'm surprised to see you." "Are you?" she said. "I thought my letter—" "Your letter was very clear," she said pleasantly. "I understood it completely." He looked at her. Something moved in his face, not guilt, not quite. More like recalibration. He had expected something else. Tears, maybe. Or the particular stiff dignity of a woman holding herself together badly. He had not expected pleasantness, and pleasantness confused him because he couldn't respond to it the way he'd planned to respond to the alternative. "Well," he said, recovering, "I'm glad you understand. I did want to handle things with discretion. You handled them with a letter," she said. "But I appreciate the thought." He smiled. It was the smile of a man who had decided to be magnanimous, which was a decision that required a gap between himself and the other person, and he was performing it now, the slight condescension of the person who has the power and is choosing to be gracious about having it. "You'll be all right, Clara," he said. "You're a capable woman. Someone will appreciate that." She looked at him. She thought about 3 years. About the specific, careful way she had believed in him. About the letter burning in the fireplace. About a man must choose a future, not a memory. She said, "I'm sure they will." She turned slightly, indicating the conversation was complete. He didn't move. She understood then that he wasn't done, that the magnanimity had been the opening position, not the conclusion, and that what was coming next was the thing he had actually come across the room for. He said it loud enough for the 8 people within comfortable earshot to hear clearly. "Still hoping someone will choose you, Clara." The room didn't go completely silent. It went to that particular near silence of a group of people who have heard something they weren't supposed to hear, and are now very carefully not reacting while absolutely reacting. Clara felt it. She also felt in the same instant something she had not felt in years, a complete and total absence of the desire to make this easier for him. She had spent years making things easier for Edward Whitmore. She had smoothed his social anxieties and managed his difficult conversations and absorbed his less admirable moments with the practiced quiet of someone who loved a person and therefore protected them from the worst of themselves. She was not doing that anymore. She turned back. She looked at him directly, not with anger, not with tears, with the specific quality of absolute clarity. "No," she said, "I am hoping I will choose myself." The near silence became complete silence. Edward opened his mouth, and the door opened. She heard him before she saw him, or rather she heard the room react to him, which was the particular collective shift of a group of people becoming more attentive in the way they became attentive to the arrival of someone whose presence changed the weight of the room. Alexander Sterling walked in. She knew who he was. Everyone in Virginia knew who Alexander Sterling was in the same general way they knew about the weather and the mountains, as a large significant feature of the landscape that affected conditions without requiring personal acquaintance. He was 38, the owner of sterling interests that extended from Virginia to New York to places she had not thought to wonder about. He was respected in the way that men were respected when their competence was undeniable and their integrity was at least as significant as their power. He was not the kind of man who attended Whitmore summer parties, which meant he was here for a reason. He came through the door, and he looked at the room with the particular efficiency of someone assessing a situation, and his eyes moved. She felt it happen before she could fully process it directly to her. Not to Edward, not to the host, not to any of the more prominent faces in the room. To her. He crossed toward her. The room parted in the specific way rooms parted for men whose authority was not performed, but simply present, and he walked through it without appearing to notice the parting, his eyes on her face, and he stopped in front of her, and he said, his voice pitched for her, not for the audience, which was itself remarkable, "Miss Bennet." "Mr. Sterling," she said. She was proud of how steady her voice was. "I believe we need to discuss a proposal," he said. The silence in the room had taken on a different quality entirely. She looked at him. He looked at her. She said, "That would require us to have met before, sir." "Yes," he said. "It would. I apologize for the unconventional introduction." He did not look apologetic. He looked like a man who had made a decision and was implementing it. "I have been made aware of your situation and your abilities, and I believe you may be exactly the person I have been looking for. If you would be willing to speak with me privately, I can explain myself more adequately." She held his gaze. She was aware, extremely aware of Edward Whitmore standing 6 feet away of the entire room, watching of the specific bizarre quality of this moment that she had not planned for and could not have predicted. She was also aware that Alexander Sterling had not looked at Edward once. Not when he came in. Not when he crossed the room. Not now. He had looked at her. Only at her. Only at, as if the only person of significance in the room was the woman Edward Whitmore had just tried to publicly diminish. "I'm willing to speak with you," she said. He offered his arm. She took it. She did not look at Edward as they walked away. She didn't need to. He took her to the smaller of the Whitmore parlors, a room off the main hall that was used for private conversation during parties, because even in 1815, Virginia summer society understood that some conversations required a degree of separation from the main audience. He stood and she sat, and he did not perform the social rituals of a man managing a woman. He looked at her directly the way she had been looked at by very few people in her life, and he said, "I'll be plain with you, Miss Bennet, because I think you're a woman who prefers plain." "I am," she said. "I need a wife," he said. She looked at him. "That's a direct statement," she said. "I don't have time for indirect ones," he said. "I'm in the middle of a property acquisition that requires, for reasons I'll explain, a woman of good character beside me in the next 3 months." My solicitor identified you as someone with considerable ability in estate management. I've done my own inquiry, and I agree with his assessment. She absorbed this. You investigated me, she said. I investigated the situation, he said. You were the most relevant element of it. How flattering, she said. He almost smiled, not quite, but almost. I understand this is unusual, he said. It's extraordinary, she said. Yes, he said without apology. She looked at him. She was thinking which she did quickly and well, and what she was thinking was this: she had just burned a letter from a man who saw her as a memory. She was now sitting across from a man who had walked into a room full of people and come directly to her because he had decided she was capable. The two things were entirely different in quality, and she recognized the difference, and she was not going to pretend she didn't. She was also not going to be naive about it. Mr. Sterling, she said. Yes? What exactly do you need a wife for? She said. And I want the actual answer, not the polite one. He looked at her for a moment. I'm acquiring a property in New York that belongs to a family who will not sell to an unmarried man, he said. It's a matter of their own conditions, not the law. They have a daughter they intended for me, and when I declined that arrangement, they revised the sale terms. I need a wife who is credible, who can manage a household and a complex social situation simultaneously, and who will not require management herself. He paused. I find women who require management to be an inefficient use of my time. She looked at him. And you thought of me, she said. My solicitor thought of you, he said. I agreed with him after review. What does the arrangement involve beyond the property acquisition? She said. That's negotiable, he said. I have conditions. I expect you would have conditions. I thought we could discuss them. She sat for a moment. She thought about her family, about the land that was running thin, about her father's pride and her mother's anxiety, and the particular math of a family that needed something to change. She thought about Edward Whitmore saying, still hoping someone will choose you. She thought about what she had said back, I am hoping I will choose myself. And she thought, what if choosing yourself looked like this? I have conditions, she said. I expected you would, he said. I manage my own finances within any shared arrangement, she said. I keep my own name in all legal matters. I am not a decoration, and I will not be treated as one. And if at any point you expect me to be silent in a room where my silence is costing us something, you will be disappointed. He looked at her. She looked back. Those are fair conditions, he said. They're not negotiable, she said. I didn't say they were, he said. She held his gaze. And my family's land, she said. The Bennett property is in difficulty. Any arrangement between us needs to address that. That can be structured, he said. It needs to be confirmed before I agree to anything, she said. You're negotiating, he said. I'm clarifying terms, she said. There's a difference. He was quiet for a moment, and then Alexander Sterling did something she had not seen Edward Whitmore do in 3 years of trying. He listened, not in the managed way of a man who was waiting for her to finish so he could respond. Actually listened the way you listened when you were receiving information that mattered, and you wanted to receive it correctly. All right, he said. I'll have my solicitor draw up the property arrangement for the Bennett land by Thursday. You review it. If it's satisfactory, we discuss the rest. If it's not, I'll revise it until it is. He paused. Does that work? She looked at him. 3 years of believing Edward Whitmore. One evening of this. The difference was so stark, it was almost funny. That works, she said. He stood. I should tell you one more thing, he said. What, she said. When I came in tonight, he said, I heard the last part of what Whitmore said to you, and what you said back. He paused. I thought you should know that I am hoping I will choose myself, is the most sensible thing I have heard anyone say in a Virginia parlor in the last 3 years. She looked at him. You came here specifically tonight, she said. It was not a question. Yes, he said. You knew he was going to say something like that. I knew his character well enough to predict the shape of it. he said. And you waited, she said, until after I'd responded. You didn't need me to respond for you, he said. She sat with that for a moment. Nobody had ever waited for her to respond for herself. They had always rushed in to rescue, to manage to soften, to redirect. Edward had done it constantly, which she understood now was not protection, but control. The people who loved her had done it out of anxiety. The people who didn't care about her had done it out of convenience. Alexander Sterling had stood in a doorway and waited for her to finish. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he agreed. He moved toward the door. Mr. Sterling, she said. He turned. Why me? She said. There are other women in Virginia with estate management experience. Why did your solicitor identify me specifically? He looked at her. Because you've been managing the Bennett estate accounts since you were 17, he said. And in 7 years, not one creditor has been treated unfairly, and not one debt has gone unaddressed, despite conditions that would have caused most estate managers to cut corners. He paused. My solicitor said you were the most honest accountant he had encountered in 30 years of practice. Another pause. He meant it as a professional assessment. I took it as a character reference. She looked at him. He's never met me, she said. No, he said. He's worked with your numbers. He said numbers didn't lie, and yours never had. She sat with that. 7 years of careful, unremarked, unacknowledged work in the Bennett family accounts done because it needed doing, and she was the one who could do it, and it had been seen. Not by anyone who'd said anything. Not by anyone who'd thanked her. By a solicitor in New York who read ledgers for a living, and a man she had met 40 minutes ago. It had been seen. Thursday, she said. Thursday, he said. He left. She sat in the small Whitmore parlor for a moment. She thought about the letter burning in the fireplace that morning. About a man must choose a future, not a memory. About 3 years of being someone's convenient present that had turned into someone's discarded past. She thought about what had just happened. She thought about a man who had walked across a room full of Virginia's most prominent families and looked at her only at her and said, Miss Bennett, I believe we need to discuss a proposal. She thought about what it meant that her answer to still hoping someone will choose you had turned out to be within 40 minutes prophetically irrelevant. She had said she was hoping to choose herself, and it appeared that choosing herself was exactly what she had just done. She stood up. She straightened her dress. She walked back into the Whitmore party. Edward was standing near the door to the main hall, and she saw him see her, and she watched his face process the specific information of a man who has made a calculation and is now discovering that the numbers don't add up the way he'd expected. She walked past him without stopping. Clara, he said. She turned. You'll never find better than me, he said. He said it with the smirk of a man who believed it completely. You know that, don't you? She looked at him for a moment. She thought about Thursday. She thought about a solicitor in New York who had been reading her numbers for 7 years. She thought about, I am hoping I will choose myself, and the man who had waited in the doorway until she finished saying it. Good night, Edward, she said. She walked out. Behind her, she heard Margaret Croft say something in a low voice to the woman beside her, and she heard the specific quality of a room full of people revising their understanding of what had just happened, and she did not stop to hear the revision, because she did not need to. She knew what had happened. She had walked into a party to prove she was not destroyed. She was leaving it something considerably better than that. She was leaving it a woman with a Thursday appointment and a solicitor's professional assessment and the particular clear-eyed satisfaction of someone who had held her ground in the worst possible public moment and come out the other side standing straight. She did not know walking to her carriage in the warm Virginia night that Alexander Sterling was standing at the Whitmore parlor window watching her go. She did not know that he had in fact arrived at the party an hour before he crossed the room to her, that he had stood against the far wall and watched her move through the space with the composed, unhurried quality of a woman who had made a decision and was seeing it through, and that he had thought watching her, yes, that's the one. Not because she was beautiful though she was, Not because she was composed, though she was that too. Because she had moved through a room full of people who knew something she was supposed to know, who were watching her with the particular cruel sympathy of a crowd waiting to see a person fall, and she had moved through it as if the watching didn't exist. Not with the brittle stiffness of someone pretending not to care. With the actual quality of a person who had made her peace with the situation before she walked in the door and was therefore genuinely unbothered by the room's opinion. He had met a great many capable women. He had not met many unbothered ones. And when Edward Whitmore had said, "Still hoping someone will choose you," and she had said, "I am hoping I will choose myself," he had stepped forward, not to rescue her. She hadn't needed rescuing. He had stepped forward because he had just watched a woman demonstrate exactly the quality he had been looking for, in exactly the conditions that proved it was real and not performed. He watched her carriage move down the Whitmore Drive. He thought Thursday. He thought this is going to be considerably more interesting than a property acquisition. He thought with the specific clarity of a man who was honest with himself about most things, I am in significant trouble. He was right about that, but he didn't know it yet. Neither did she. He was right about that, but he didn't know it yet, and Clara Bennett, sitting in her carriage on the way home from the Whitmore party, with the Virginia night moving past the window and her hands folded quietly in her lap, was thinking about Thursday, with the particular focused attention she brought to everything that mattered. Not about Alexander Sterling personally. Not yet. She was not a woman who made the mistake of confusing an interesting situation with an interesting person before she had enough information to tell the difference. She was thinking about Thursday, the way she thought about accounts. What did she know? What didn't she know? And what did she need to find out before she could make a sound decision? What she knew Alexander Sterling had come to the Whitmore party specifically. He had done so after having his solicitor investigate her work. He had offered a proposal without knowing her which was either arrogant or efficient, and the distinction would tell her something important about him. He had waited while she finished speaking before stepping forward, which was either calculated or genuine, and that distinction mattered too. What she didn't know, everything else. What she needed to find out by Thursday, enough of everything else, to know whether walking into a meeting with the most powerful man in 3 states was a decision she was making or a decision being made for her. She had spent 3 years having decisions made for her. She was not going to do it again. She got home, helped her mother with the evening tasks that didn't stop because of parties or burned letters, and sat at her desk until midnight, going through every piece of information about Alexander Sterling she could access from her own memory and her father's library, which was limited, but not nothing. By midnight, she had a reasonable picture. By Thursday morning, she had a better one. Her father found out on Wednesday. He came into the kitchen where she was reviewing the Bennett estate accounts, the habit of 7 years, the first thing every morning, because the accounts told her what was real and what was wishful, and she needed to know the difference before she did anything else. And he sat down at the table and looked at her with the expression of a man who had heard something that confused him entirely. "Margaret Croft's mother came to call this morning," he said. "I imagine she did," Clara said without looking up from the ledger. "She says Alexander Sterling spoke with you at the Whitmore party." "He did." Clara. Her father's voice had the particular quality it had when he was trying to be patient with something he found alarming. "Alexander Sterling." "Yes, father." "Do you understand who that is?" She looked up. "I understand exactly who he is," she said. "I've spent 3 days making sure I do. His assets include property in Virginia, New York, and Pennsylvania. His primary business interests are in land acquisition and shipping. He has a reputation for completing what he starts and for treating his business associates fairly, which is rarer than it should be." She paused. "He also has a solicitor who has apparently been reading our family's accounts." Her father stared at her. "He's been looking at our accounts," he said. "He's been looking at my work in our accounts," she said. "There's a difference." She set down her pen. "Father, he came to make a proposal, a business arrangement. I'm meeting with him Thursday to hear the terms. I haven't agreed to anything." "A business arrangement?" her father repeated. "Yes." What kind of business arrangement requires? The kind that I will explain after Thursday, when I know the full terms, she said, and when I have decided whether I think they're worth accepting. She looked at him directly. This is my decision to make. I want you to understand that before we discuss it further. Her father looked at her for a long moment. He was a good man. She had always known that about him, not a particularly strong man, not a man who made things happen, but a good one. The kind of good that showed up in small, consistent ways, rather than dramatic ones. He had never doubted her competence. He had relied on it heavily sometimes without acknowledging it, but he had never doubted it. All right, he said. Thursday. Thursday, she said. She went back to the accounts. She arrived at Sterling's temporary office in Richmond at 9 o'clock on Thursday morning. She had made the choice to arrive at 9 specifically early enough to signal that she was not performing indifference late enough to not be waiting when he arrived. She was not going to play social games with this man. But she was also not going to pretend she had no strategy, because she always had a strategy, and pretending otherwise was its own kind of dishonesty. His solicitor, a compact, precise man of 50 named Mr. Graves, met her at the door and showed her into a room where 2 chairs had been arranged across a desk from each other, which she noted immediately. Not a desk between them, with him behind it and her in front of it. The chairs facing each other across the desk, as if it were a surface for papers, rather than a barrier between positions. She sat. She waited. Alexander Sterling came in 3 minutes later, which she thought was probably the time it had taken him to be informed of her arrival, rather than a deliberate management of her waiting time, and he came in the way he moved through rooms without ceremony direct. He sat. He looked at her. Miss Bennet, he said. Mr. Sterling, she said. I've been doing my own review since Tuesday. I expected you would, he said. Your New York property acquisition, she said. The Halcourt estate. The family's condition for the sale is that the buyer be a married man, which means you need to be married before the transfer can be completed. She paused. The Halcourt family has a daughter named Eloise who is 21. You declined her. Something moved in his expression, not surprise exactly, more like recalibration. That's accurate, he said. Why did you decline her? Clara said. He looked at her for a moment. Because she was afraid of me, he said, and I find that inefficient. Clara looked at him. That's an unusual reason, she said. It's an honest one, he said. A wife who is afraid of me would require constant management. I don't have the time or the inclination. He paused. You are not afraid of me. No, she said. I'm not. I know, he said. I watched you for an hour at the Whitmore party before I crossed the room. You weren't afraid of anything in that room, including the thing that was supposed to break you. She held his gaze. You watched for an hour, she said. I needed to be certain, he said. I don't make proposals based on incomplete information. Neither do I, she said. Which is why I'm going to ask you some questions before we discuss any terms. Ask, he said. She asked. She asked about the Halcourt estate acquisition. Not the terms those were in his solicitor's summary, but the why, the reason he wanted that specific property, because the why told her things the terms didn't. He answered directly. The Halcourt land sat between 2 of his existing properties, and its creek access was the piece that made the whole northern operation viable. Without it, the shipping route required a 12-mile detour that cost him money every quarter. She asked about his previous business partners and what had ended those arrangements. He told her about 2 that had gone badly, and why one through the other party's dishonesty, one through a fundamental disagreement about risk that neither of them had articulated clearly enough at the start. He said the second one was partly his fault for not asking the right questions early. She asked about his household in New York. He described it briefly. A full staff efficiently run a housekeeper named Mrs. Grant, who had been with him for 6 years, and was, he said, the actual authority on domestic matters, which he had no interest in managing himself. She asked, What would you actually need from a wife beyond the legal status? He looked at her. Someone who can represent the Sterling interests in social situations I can't attend, he said. There are 3 significant families in New York whose cooperation I need for the next acquisition and whose wives determine whether I get invited to the right conversations. I need someone who can be in those rooms and understand what matters in them." He paused. "And someone who can look at the accounts I hand her and tell me what's actually wrong with them, not what I want to hear is wrong with them." "You think something is wrong with your accounts," she said. "I think my current bookkeeper is telling me what I want to hear," he said. "I haven't been able to confirm it, but I have the specific feeling I get when something doesn't add up, and people around me are hoping I won't notice." She looked at him. "I'd need to see them," she said. "That's not part of this meeting," he said. "I know," she said. "But if the arrangement moves forward, the accounts are the first thing I look at. I want you to understand that I won't soften what I find." "I'm counting on it," he said. She sat with that for a moment. She had never been counted on for her honesty by someone who had a choice. Her family had counted on her because they needed her. Edward had counted on her management while ignoring her actual assessments. The people who had relied on her had done so because of necessity, not preference. Alexander Sterling had other options. He was choosing directness because he valued it. "My conditions," she said. "Tell me," he said. She told him. The same conditions she had stated at the Whitmore party. Her own financial authority, her name in legal documents, no decorative function. And she added the ones she had developed since Tuesday, a specific monthly account she managed independently, written confirmation of the Bennett estate arrangement before any formal agreement, and the right to dissolve the arrangement after 2 years, if either party found it unsatisfactory. He listened to every condition. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The 2-year dissolution clause," he said. "That's protective of you." "Yes," she said. "But it also creates uncertainty for the Sterling arrangements," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I want the Bennett estate resolution completed and documented before we sign anything. If the arrangement dissolves in 2 years, I need my family's land to be secured independently of my continued participation." He looked at her. "You're protecting against me," he said. "I'm protecting against circumstances," she said, "which includes you." He was quiet again. Then, "Your conditions are accepted, all of them, including the 2-year clause with one revision. It becomes available to either party, not just you." She looked at him. "You want the option too," she said. "If it turns out I was wrong about you, I want to be able to address that," he said. "I don't expect to be wrong. But intellectual honesty requires acknowledging the possibility." She sat with that. It was the most honest thing a man had said to her in 3 years, possibly longer. "Agreed," she said. He extended his hand. She shook it. It was brief and businesslike and completely unremarkable. It was also, she thought, the most equal handshake she had ever been part of.
Ventamba.
The wedding happened 3 weeks later. Small at the Bennett family home, with the specific efficiency of 2 people who were not performing a romance, and therefore did not need the apparatus of one. The minister, her parents, her sister, Mr. Graves, and 2 witnesses. Her mother cried. Her father did not. But his voice when he gave her hand was thicker than usual, and she pressed his hand briefly, and he pressed back, and that was enough. Alexander was entirely composed, throughout which she found she did not mind. Composure was not coldness. She had learned the difference from the inside. She had been composed at the Whitmore party, while internally recalibrating the entire structure of the next several years of her life, and nobody looking at her would have known. He was doing the same kind of thing. She could see it now that she was looking. After the ceremony, while her mother was organizing the small refreshments, and her father was talking to Mr. Graves about the Bennett estate documents, Alexander came to stand beside her. "All right," he said. "Yes," she said. "You're thinking about the accounts," he said. She looked at him. "How did you know that?" she said. "You have the same expression you had when I mentioned my bookkeeper," he said. Slightly focused, slightly concerned, like someone who has noticed a number that doesn't add up and is working out where the error originates. She stared at him. "I was thinking about the accounts," she said. "We leave for New York in 2 days," he said. "You can look at them the morning after we arrive." "The morning after," she said. "I assumed you'd want a day to assess the household first," he said. "Learn who does what and how. You'll want that context before you look at the numbers." She looked at him. "You've been thinking about how I work," she said. "I've been thinking about how to make the arrangement efficient," he said. "That requires understanding how you operate." She looked at her family across the room, her mother's relief, her father's complicated pride, her sister who was watching Alexander with the expression of someone who had expected something different and was revising. "New York," she said. "New York," he said. New York was larger than she had expected and louder than Virginia, and moved at a pace that required immediate adjustment, which she made not without effort, but without drama, because adjustment was something she had been doing her whole life. The Sterling house was substantial and well run exactly as he had described. Mrs. Grant was 60 broad and had the specific authority of someone who had managed a complex household for a long time and was prepared to be professional about the new arrangement without being warm about it until the new arrangement had proven itself worth warmth. Clara understood that completely. On the first morning she walked the household with Mrs. Grant, asked questions, and listened to the answers. On the second morning she asked to see the accounts. Alexander handed them to her at breakfast without comment. She took them to the small writing room that Mrs. Grant had allocated for her use, and she spent 6 hours going through them. She found it at hour 4, not a dramatic discovery, not a missing fortune or an obvious fraud. Something smaller and therefore worse, a systematic pattern of small overcharges from 3 suppliers that individually looked like rounding errors and collectively added up to approximately $800 over 18 months. She did the arithmetic 3 times. $800 moved out of the Sterling household accounts in increments small enough to be overlooked by someone who wasn't looking for them. Someone had been counting on not being looked for. She was wrong about that. She brought the accounts to Alexander that evening. He was in his study working, and he looked up when she came in, and whatever he saw in her face made him set down his pen immediately. "You found it," he said. "You already knew there was something to find," she said. "I knew something was wrong," he said. "I didn't know what." She set the accounts on the desk and pointed to the pattern she had documented 4 pages of her own notes, laying out the timeline, the amounts, the supplier names, and the cumulative total. He read it. He read all 4 pages without speaking. Then he said, "My bookkeeper." "The pattern starts 18 months ago," she said, "which is roughly consistent with when your previous bookkeeper retired, and the current one took over based on the handwriting change in the ledgers." He was quiet. $800, he said. "In 18 months, she said. The rate is increasing. The last 6 months are higher than the first 12. He looked at the page. "He was testing whether I'd notice," he said. "He was testing whether whoever read the accounts would notice," she said. "He may not have known you were aware something was wrong. He may have been planning to accelerate now that the amounts had been small enough to pass for 18 months. Alexander stood. "I'll handle the bookkeeper," he said. "Before you do," she said, "I want to know whether the suppliers are active participants or just used as the mechanism. If they're active, the arrangement needs to end. If they're passive, the overcharging can be corrected and the relationship preserved." He looked at her. "You're already thinking about remediation," he said. "I'm thinking about what comes after," she said. "You handle the bookkeeper, but then we need a clean system going forward, and I'd like to help design it." He was quiet for a moment. "We," he said. "It's our household," she said. "The accounts are my responsibility now. That was one of the conditions." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Yes, you're right." He called for his household manager. He had the bookkeeper removed from the accounts by 9 o'clock that evening efficiently and without a scene. Clara spent the following morning with Mrs. Grant reviewing which suppliers were worth keeping and which needed to be reconsidered. Mrs. Grant, who had warmed incrementally since the first morning, contributed information Clara didn't have about the household's actual needs versus what had been ordered, which added another layer to the picture. By the end of the second day in New York, Clara Bennett. Clara Sterling, now though she was still getting used to that combination, had found $800 of theft ended it and begun building the system that would prevent it from happening again. She had also, without meaning to, acquired Mrs. Grant's respect, which turned out to be worth more than she'd expected. "You work fast," Mrs. Grant told her on the evening of the second day. "I work thoroughly," Clara said. "Fast is a side effect." Mrs. Grant looked at her with the expression of someone who had revised an assessment significantly upward. "Mr. Sterling was right about you," she said. "What did Mr. Sterling say about me?" Clara said. "He said you were the most honest person he'd encountered in the professional category since Mr. Graves," Mrs. Grant said. "He said you were someone whose opinion he would actually trust." Clara looked at the ledger in front of her. Someone whose opinion he would actually trust. She thought about 3 years of Edward Whitmore, who had listened to her opinions on his estate management and implemented her suggestions and never once told her that he trusted her judgment, because telling her would have required acknowledging that her judgment mattered, and acknowledging that would have required acknowledging that she mattered, and Edward Whitmore had not been able to do that without threatening his own sense of the arrangement. She thought about a man she had known for 3 weeks who had handed her his accounts without comment and waited to see what she found. "Tell me about the New York families," she said to Mrs. Grant. "The ones Mr. Sterling needs social access to. I understand there are 3. I need to know what they care about before I meet them." Mrs. Grant sat down. She talked for an hour. Clara listened and took notes and asked the questions that Mrs. Grant's answers prompted, and by the end of it, she had a working picture of 3 families, their interests, their concerns, their existing opinions of Alexander Sterling, and the specific social situations where Clara's presence could do the most useful work. "You're going to be good at this," Mrs. Grant said when they finished. "I've been managing social situations for my family since I was 17, Clara said. "The scale is different. The mechanics are the same." Mrs. Grant nodded slowly. "One more thing," she said. "The Alderton family. Mrs. Alderton specifically. She lost money in a failed venture 2 years ago, and she blames Mr. Sterling because he chose not to invest in it, which she interpreted as a judgment on the venture's worth." "Was it?" Clara said. "Was it what?" "A judgment on the venture's worth," Clara said. "Yes," Mrs. Grant said. "The venture failed." "Then Mrs. Alderton is angry because he was right and she was wrong," Clara said. "Yes," Mrs. Grant said. "And does she know he was right?" "She knows the venture failed," Mrs. Grant said. "She does not admit the connection." Clara thought about that. "I'll call on Mrs. Alderton first," she said. Mrs. Grant looked at her. "Most people avoid Mrs. Alderton," she said. "I know," Clara said. "That's why I'll go first." She called on Mrs. Alderton on Thursday, alone without Alexander, which was the first decision, because going with him would have made the visit about him rather than about the relationship between 2 women, which was what it needed to be. Mrs. Alderton was 54, formidable, and had the specific quality of a woman who had been managing something painful by converting it into social hostility for long enough that the conversion had become habit. Clara recognized it. She had managed her own painful things for long enough to know the shape of that conversion from the inside. She did not address the Sterling situation directly. She talked about New York, what had surprised her about it, what she was learning, the specific challenges of managing a large household in a city rather than on a rural estate. She asked Mrs. Alderton's opinion on 3 things that Mrs. Alderton clearly had opinions on. She listened to those opinions completely and responded to them honestly, including once saying, "I disagree with that, and here's why," in a tone that made the disagreement feel like a compliment rather than a confrontation. Mrs. Alderton was quiet for a moment after that. Then she said, "You're not what I expected." What did you expect? Clara said. A Virginia country girl who married well and knew it, Mrs. Alderton said. Someone who would manage me politely. I don't manage people, Clara said. I find it inefficient. Something shifted in Mrs. Alderton's face. Mr. Sterling said something very similar once, she said. I know, Clara said. It's one of the things we have in common. Mrs. Alderton looked at her for a long moment. Come to dinner Saturday, she said. I'll invite the Halcourts. Clara went very still. The Halcourts, the family from whom Alexander was trying to acquire the estate, the family whose condition had started this entire arrangement. I'd be delighted, she said. She walked back to the Sterling house in the September air, and she thought about the specific way that useful things accumulated. One decision leading to the next one, conversation, opening a door. One woman taking a risk and finding it paid. She went to find Alexander. He was in the study. She told him about Mrs. Alderton. He was quiet for a moment. She invited you to dinner, he said. Saturday, she said, with the Halcourts. He looked at her. The Halcourts are the family. I know who they are, she said. I've been reading your correspondence. He stared at her. You've been reading my correspondence, he said. The business correspondence that relates to the New York acquisitions, she said. You gave me authority over the accounts. The correspondence context is necessary to understand the accounts. I should have asked before looking, but I made a judgment call. She paused. If that's a problem, tell me now. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, It's not a problem. Good, she said. Because Mrs. Alderton and the Halcourts are both at dinner Saturday, which means Saturday evening is more important than any of the formal meetings you have scheduled next week. I need to know what you need from the Halcourt relationship before then. He looked at her. Something was happening in his face that she had seen there twice before in the Whitmore parlor, when she had given her conditions, and in this study, when she had handed him 4 pages of documentation on his bookkeeper. The expression of a man who was used to being the most prepared person in any conversation, finding that he was not. The Halcourts need to believe this is a real marriage, he said. Their condition for the sale wasn't just legal, it was personal. The late Mr. Halcourt specified in his will that the estate should go to someone who would maintain it as a home, not purely as an investment. They're looking for evidence that the Sterling household is, he paused, genuine. She looked at him. They're looking for evidence that we're a real couple, she said. Yes, he said. She thought about Saturday, about a dinner table, about the specific performance of a marriage that had started as an arrangement and had been in the 3 weeks since something considerably more complicated than arrangement implied. That should not be difficult, she said. She said it carefully, looking at the correspondence on his desk rather than at him. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. I don't think it will be. She looked up. He was looking at her, not in the assessing way of the first few meetings, not in the professionally attentive way of a man reviewing an arrangement. Something else. Something that had the quality of a man who had been paying close attention for 3 weeks and was now facing the specific problem of knowing someone considerably better than he had planned to. She recognized it. Because she had the same problem. She looked back at the correspondence. I'll need to know more about the Halcourt family before Saturday, she said. Not the business details, the personal ones, what they care about, what they've lost, what kind of people they are when they're not negotiating. I'll ask Mr. Graves, he said. I'll ask Mrs. Grant, she said. She'll know more. He almost smiled. Probably, he said. She picked up the correspondence she'd come to return. Clara, he said. She stopped. She turned. He said, the accounts, the bookkeeper, Mrs. Alderton, Saturday. He paused. You've been here 4 days. Yes, she said. I told my solicitor you were the most capable person he'd identified in 30 years of practice, he said. I believed it when I said it. I want you to know that 4 days in, I believe it considerably more. She looked at him. She thought about Thursday in Richmond, about conditions that were accepted without negotiation, about a man who had waited in a doorway until she finished speaking. She thought about 4 days of being exactly who she was, without adjusting for anyone's comfort, and finding that not only was that acceptable, but that it was specifically what was required. "Thank you," she said. She meant it completely. She went back to the writing room, and the accounts, and the specific, productive, entirely genuine satisfaction of work that was hers in a life that was hers, beside a man who was turning out to be, in the most inconvenient and entirely real way, someone she respected, which was, she was beginning to understand the beginning of something considerably larger. She was not going to examine that yet. She had accounts to finish. Saturday was coming, and Clara Bennett spent Friday doing what she always did. Before something important she prepared until there was nothing left to prepare. And then she sat with the remaining uncertainty and made her peace with it. Mrs. Grant had given her 2 hours of information about the Halcourt family the previous evening, and Clara had spent an hour after that reading the correspondence she wasn't supposed to have read, but had. And by Friday morning, she had a picture that was more complete than anything Alexander's solicitor had produced. The Halcourt family was not primarily interested in money. That was the thing that the business correspondence missed entirely, because business correspondence was written by people who assumed that money was the primary language of negotiation. And sometimes it was, but in this case, it wasn't. The late Mr. Halcourt had been a man who built things and then cared about what happened to them. The estate in question, a property called Halcourt's Green, 40 miles north of the city, had been his father's and his grandfather's before that, and the condition in his will, that the buyer be a married man, was not a social convention. It was a specific attempt to ensure that whoever purchased the estate would maintain it as a working household rather than an investment property to be parceled and sold. The Halcourts were not selling to Alexander Sterling. They were deciding whether to trust him with something their family had built over 3 generations. That was an entirely different conversation. Clara found Alexander in the study at 7 in the morning and told him this. He looked up from his papers. "You've been thinking about Saturday," he said. "I've been thinking about the Halcourts," she said. "There's a difference. Saturday is the mechanism. The Halcourts are the point." She sat down across from him without being invited, which she had stopped waiting for 3 days ago. "The correspondence from the Halcourt estate over the last year, the parts that aren't about the sale, what do they talk about?" He looked at her. "The farm manager," he said slowly. "There's a farm manager named Aldous who's been with them for 30 years. They mention him in almost every letter." "They're worried about what happens to him," she said. "I hadn't—" He stopped. "You hadn't thought of it that way," she said. "Not a criticism, an observation." "No," he said. "Tonight," she said, "when the Halcourts talk about the estate they're going to listen for, whether you see the people in it or just the property. If they hear the property, you won't get the sale regardless of what I do at that dinner table." She looked at him directly. "Do you know Aldous's full name?" He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "Find out before tonight," she said. "And find out if there are other staff who have been there long term. Not because you need to know for the sale, because it will tell you something real about what the estate actually is." He looked at her for a long moment. "You would have made an exceptional solicitor," he said. "I would have made an exceptional anything they'd let me be," she said. "That's not relevant. Saturday is." He almost smiled. "I'll have Mr. Graves get the staff information by noon," he said. "Good," she said. She stood. "One more thing." "Yes?" "Tonight when Mrs. Alderton asks how we met," she said, "let me answer. Don't correct whatever I say." He looked at her. "You're going to tell a version," he said. "I'm going to tell the true version," she said. "Just not all of it, and the parts I tell will be more useful than the complete account." He was quiet. "All right," he said. She went back to the writing room. She had one more thing to prepare. The Alderton dinner was 12 people. Clara assessed them in the first 20 minutes, the way she assessed accounts quickly, completely, with the specific attention that identified what was real and what was performance. Mrs. Alderton, at the head of her own table, was more relaxed than Clara had seen her on the formal call, which told her that Mrs. Alderton's hostility was partly armor, and underneath the armor was a woman who was actually good company. The two other couples were new money, trying to appear old money, and old money that had stopped trying, and those were the interesting ones, the ones who had been at this long enough to be honest about it. The Halcourts were at the far end of the table. Margaret Halcourt was 62, with the quiet authority of a woman who had managed a large household for 40 years and knew it. Her son James was 35, careful with the look of a man who had inherited responsibility before he was ready for it, and had grown into it gradually, and was still growing. His wife Anne was beside him, 28, watching everything with the attentive expression of someone who was not going to form an opinion until she had all the information. Clara liked Anne immediately. Anne reminded her of herself 7 years ago, before she'd learned to let the watching show. Alexander was on her left. He was doing what he did in social situations, present, composed, attentive, saying the right things in the right intervals without revealing much. He was good at it. She had observed him in 4 social situations now, and he was consistently good at it, which meant it was genuine competence rather than performed confidence. What he was not good at, what she had noticed from the beginning, and which no one else seemed to have identified, was small talk that required personal disclosure. He managed everything large skillfully, and everything small by making it larger. It was his one consistent social limitation. She was going to need to compensate for that tonight. She started with Mrs. Alderton, because Mrs. Alderton was the center of gravity of the table, and getting the center right made everything else easier. She asked about a painting on the east wall, a landscape she genuinely didn't recognize, and Mrs. Alderton told a story about her husband buying it from a Philadelphia artist 20 years ago. That was actually a good story, funny in the specific dry way of someone who had been married a long time and could find humor in the things that used to exasperate. The table relaxed. Clara turned to James Halcourt. "I understand the estate has been in your family for 3 generations, she said. "That's extraordinary. Most families don't manage to keep land that long." He looked at her with the careful expression of a man who had been managing solicitor conversations about this estate for a year and had learned to be precise about what he said. "My grandfather built it," he said. "My father improved it. I'm trying not to ruin it." "That's a modest way to put it," Clara said. "It's an accurate one," he said. "We've had difficult years." "Most families with land have," she said. "The question is whether the difficulty teaches you something about the land or just about how much trouble you can survive." He looked at her. "What did it teach your family?" he said. She had not expected him to turn it back. She received it without hesitation. "That the land outlasts everything else," she said. "The money goes up and down. The weather is unreliable. The markets are worse. But the land itself, if you understand it and work with it rather than just extracting from it, it gives back more than it takes." She paused. "My mother told me that. She was right about most things." Margaret Halcourt, who had been listening from 2 seats down, said, "Where is your family's land?" "Virginia," Clara said. "Bennett land, my father's side." "And you managed it," Margaret said. There was something in her voice, not skepticism, something more careful. Assessment. "I manage the accounts," Clara said, "since I was 17. My father understood the land itself. I understood the numbers that represented it." "Those are different skills," Margaret said. "They are," Clara said, "and both necessary." "Which did you find harder?" Margaret said. Clara looked at her. This was the real conversation. She understood that. The dinner was the mechanism. This was the point. "The numbers were never hard," she said. "Numbers are honest. They don't tell you what you want to hear. They tell you what's true, and if you read them right, you know exactly where you stand." She paused. "The hard part was getting the people around me to believe the numbers over their own optimism." Margaret Halcourt was quiet for a moment. "Aldous has managed our estate for 30 years, she said. "Not as a non sequitur, as a test." "I know," Clara said. "Alexander mentioned him. He said Aldous was one of the people he most wanted to speak with when we visited the estate." She felt Alexander's slight stillness beside her, the specific quality of a man who had been told something at noon and was now hearing it deployed, and who was realizing possibly for the first time exactly how prepared she had been for this moment. "Did he?" Margaret said. She looked at Alexander. "Aldous knows that land in ways that no survey can document," Alexander said. He said it with the steady directness that was his natural mode. "That knowledge doesn't transfer in a sale. It transfers in a relationship. I'd want to build one." Clara did not look at him. She was watching Margaret Halcourt's face. Something in it changed. Not dramatically. A slight softening around the eyes. The specific relaxation of a person who has been braced for one kind of answer and received another. "We'll visit the estate next month," Clara said, filling the moment before it could become something Margaret felt she needed to respond to formally. "I want to see the kitchen garden. Alexander tells me it's the most productive in the county." "It is," James said. He said it with the first genuine warmth she had heard from him. "My mother designed it." "Then I want to hear about it from her directly," Clara said. She looked at Margaret. "If you're willing." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "I'm willing," she said. Bah. The conversation moved on. Clara managed the table for the next 2 hours, the way she managed accounts. She knew where everything was. She knew what needed attention, and she moved between the different elements with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this kind of work for long enough that it looked like ease. She caught Alexander watching her twice. Not obviously. He was too skilled for obvious. But she had learned his tells in 3 weeks, the slight angle of his head when he was paying careful attention to something, the specific quality of stillness that meant he was not being passive, but observant. He was watching her work. She did not mind. After dinner in the drawing room, Anne Halcourt found her. "Mrs. Sterling," she said. "Clara," she said, "please." Anne looked at her with the direct eyes of someone who had decided to take a risk and was doing it. "Can I ask you something that isn't polite?" she said. "I prefer impolite questions," Clara said. "Polite ones are usually about something else." Anne almost smiled. "Did you choose this?" she said. "The arrangement with Mr. Sterling. Did you choose it or did it choose you?" Clara looked at her. She thought about a burning letter, about a party she had attended to prove she wasn't destroyed, about conditions set across a desk and a handshake that felt like the first equal thing she'd ever been part of. "I chose it," she said. "Every part of it." "Even the parts that were difficult," Anne said. "Especially those," Clara said. Anne was quiet for a moment. "My husband," she said carefully, "chose me in a situation that wasn't entirely straightforward either. People said it wasn't the right match. People said I wasn't—" She stopped. "It doesn't matter what they said. What mattered was that he was certain, and I chose to believe in his certainty, and it turned out to be real." "And," Clara said. "And I'm telling you," Anne said, "because you look at Mr. Sterling the way James looked at me in the first year. Like you're still deciding whether to trust it." Clara went still. "I'm not," she started. "You are," Anne said, not unkindly. "It's all right. It takes time." She paused. "He looks at you the same way, by the way. I've been watching him all evening." Clara said nothing for a moment. She was processing. "How does he look at me?" she said. "Like someone who found something he didn't know he was looking for." Anne said, "and is being very careful not to do anything that might make it go away." The drawing room was warm around them, and the conversation from the other guests was a low, comfortable sound, and Clara stood with what Anne had said and did not know what to do with it except to hold it. "The estate," she said finally. "Halcourt's Green. Your family will make the right decision about it. Whatever you decide." Anne looked at her. "I know," she said. "I think we already have." In the carriage home, Alexander said Aldous. "Yes," Clara said. "You used it perfectly." "You said the right thing," she said. "I just created the moment for you to say it." He was quiet. "Clara," he said. "Yes." "What did you and Anne Halcourt talk about in the drawing room?" She looked at the carriage window. "The estate," she said. "And," he said. She turned. "And things that aren't your business yet," she said. He received that without pushing. Yet she had said. Yet. Neither of them mentioned it. But it sat in the carriage between them, specific and real, all the way home. 3 days later, Mr. Graves brought the letter. The Halcourt family was prepared to proceed with the sale of Halcourt's Green to Alexander and Clara Sterling, pending final terms. Alexander read the letter at the breakfast table and handed it to her without comment. She read it. She put it down. "The kitchen garden tour," she said. "We'll plan for October," he said. "Good," she said. She went back to her eggs. She was smiling. Not the composed public smile that she had deployed at the Alderton dinner. The actual one. The one that meant something, entirely happened inside her chest. She did not think he noticed. She was wrong. The trouble arrived the following Tuesday, in the form of a letter from Virginia. She recognized the handwriting before she opened it, because she had been trained to recognize handwriting by 7 years of managing correspondence, and this handwriting had a specific quality, forward-leaning, slightly rushed, with the particular loops of a man who wrote quickly because he was always trying to catch up to his own thoughts. Edward Whitmore. She opened it at the writing room desk alone, which was where she handled things she needed to process without an audience. "Dear Clara, I find myself in New York on business and have heard of your recent marriage. I would like to call on you as I believe there are matters between us that were never properly resolved. I hope we might speak as friends. Edward." She read it twice. She noted matters between us that were never properly resolved, as if the resolution of their previous arrangement had been incomplete on her end rather than concluded on his. The framing was so consistent with his character that she almost appreciated it for its thoroughness. She noted as friends. As if they were friends. As if friendship was a category they occupied. She thought about what he actually wanted. Edward Whitmore in New York, calling on Clara Sterling, who had married Alexander Sterling 3 weeks after Edward's letter, who was now in the Sterling household with access to the Sterling accounts, who was clearly in a position of considerably more influence than the one he had assigned her, was not calling as a friend. He was reassessing. She had become something he had not calculated for when he decided she was a memory, and now he was recalibrating, and the recalibration had the specific shape of a man who wanted to reestablish contact with something he had discarded, and was now finding more valuable at a distance. She was not going to let him. She wrote back the same day. 4 sentences, Edward. "Thank you for writing. I'm afraid I'm not available for calls this month, as we have a full social calendar. I hope your New York business goes well. I wish you every success. Clara Sterling." She signed it with her married name. She posted it. She told Alexander that evening. Not immediately. She finished the afternoon's account work first, and reviewed 2 invoices that needed her decision, and talked to Mrs. Grant about the October estate visit planning. Then she went to the study and told him. He listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You already responded," he said. "This morning," she said. "I declined." "Without asking me," he said. "It was my correspondence," she said. "My decision about my previous acquaintance." She looked at him directly. "I'm telling you now as a courtesy and because it's information you should have. Not because I needed your permission." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I'm not suggesting you did." "Then why did you note that I'd already responded?" she said. "Because," he said carefully, "I wanted to know if you were going to tell me." She looked at him. "I'm telling you," she said. "Yes," he said. "You are." The room was quiet. "He'll come anyway," Alexander said. "Men like Whitmore don't take indirect refusals." "I know," she said. "When he does, I'll handle it," she said. "I know you will," he said. "I'm not offering to handle it for you. I'm telling you that if you want me present when you do, I'll be there." She looked at him. "That's different from what most men would say," she said. "Most men haven't met you," he said. She sat with that. She thought about what Anne Halcourt had said in the Alderton drawing room. He looks at you like someone who found something he didn't know he was looking for. She thought about the specific care of a man who had said, "I'll be there," rather than "I'll take care of it." "Thank you," she said. She meant it. She went back to the accounts. She had known Edward would come. She had known it the moment she read his letter, not from anything he had written, but from her understanding of his character, which was, after 3 years of believing in him, the most complete thing she had. He would come. And when he did, she was going to need to be exactly who she was in that room, without the management of his ego, without the softening of his discomfort, without any of the adjustments she had spent 3 years making. She was not going to make them. She was also going to need to be certain that what she said and did came from her own choices, rather than from any desire to perform for an audience, including the audience of Alexander Sterling's opinion of her. She sat with that. She was more concerned about Alexander's opinion than she had been a week ago. That was new. That was the thing Anne had seen, and she had not quite let herself see. She pressed her hands flat on the account ledger and told herself to focus. Edward was coming. The Halcourt estate sale was proceeding. The accounts were clean. Everything was going exactly as planned. Except for the one thing that wasn't in any plan. The one thing that had started happening to her in the space between Thursday meetings and Saturday dinners and account ledgers handed across breakfast tables. The one thing she had specifically not planned for and was finding to her considerable inconvenience that she could not account for at all. She opened the next ledger. She was very good at accounts. She was going to have to learn to be good at this too. Edward came on Thursday. She had expected Wednesday, which meant his arrival on Thursday told her something about him that she already knew. He had been managing the timing, trying to create the impression of not being eager. And he had miscalculated by 1 day, because managing your timing required knowing your audience, and Edward had never actually known his. Mrs. Grant came to the writing room at 11 o'clock and said, "A Mr. Whitmore is at the door. He says he has an appointment." "He doesn't," Clara said. "I told him that," Mrs. Grant said. "What did he say?" "He said he was an old friend, and he was certain there must have been a miscommunication." Clara looked at the account she was working on. She finished the line she was calculating. Then she put down her pen and stood up. "Show him to the front parlor," she said. "Tell him I'll be 15 minutes." She was not going to rush. She went to her room. She checked her appearance, not for vanity, but because she had learned young that the specific way you entered a room communicated something before you said a word, and she intended to communicate the right thing. She looked like what she was, a woman in her own house who had been interrupted from work she valued. She went to the front parlor. He was standing at the window. He turned when she came in, and she watched his face do something she had never seen it do in 3 years. It cycled through several expressions too quickly to fully manage. Surprise assessment. Something that might have been the beginning of regret if he was capable of that. And finally, the performed warmth of a man who had decided on his approach and was implementing it. "Clara," he said, "you look well." "Edward," she said, "I told you I wasn't available. I was in the neighborhood," he said. "I thought—" "You weren't in the neighborhood," she said. "The Sterling house is not on the way to anywhere you'd have business." She sat down and looked at him. "What do you want?" He looked at her. He sat down across from her. "I want to talk," he said. "I think I made a mistake." She looked at him. "I think you made a series of choices," she said. "Choices have consequences. That's not the same as a mistake." "Clara." "Edward." Her voice was even, completely, entirely even. "What you said in your letter last summer was true. You chose a future. I understand that. What you did not understand at the time, and I don't blame you for this because I didn't understand it either, is that the future you were choosing was smaller than the one you were walking away from." He stared at her. "I'm not saying this to wound you," she said. "I'm saying it because it's true, and you came here for honesty, and honesty is what you're going to get." She looked at him directly. "I was not a memory. I was a person. And the person I was, and the work I was doing, and the capabilities I had were things you relied on for 3 years, while never acknowledging them. And when you left, you discovered the absence of them. And now you're here because you've realized what they were worth." He was very still. "I'm not available," she said. "Not because I'm angry. Because I have a life that is mine that I built, and there is no version of whatever you came here to propose that fits inside it." She stood. "I hope you find what you're actually looking for, Edward. I mean that." She moved toward the door. "You didn't love me," he said. It came out differently than anything else he'd said, stripped of the management. Raw, surprised. "At the end, did you?" She stopped. She turned. She thought about Thursday meetings and Saturday dinners and account ledgers at breakfast and a man who waited in a doorway. "I loved who I thought you were," she said. "I was wrong about who you were. That's not the same as not loving." She left. She walked back to the writing room. She sat down. She picked up her pen. Her hand was steady. She finished the account line she had been working on when Mrs. Grant came in. She didn't hear Alexander come to the doorway until he said her name, and she looked up, and he was standing there with the expression of a man who had been in his study, which was directly above the front parlor, and who had heard without meaning to the specific quality of a conversation ending. "He's gone," he said. "He's gone," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Are you all right?" he said. She looked at him. She thought about all the times in 3 years that she had been asked, "Are you all right?" by someone who needed her to be so that they could stop worrying and get on with things. He was asking because he wanted to know. "Yes," she said. "I'm all right." "Truly," he said. She looked at him directly. "Truly," she said. "He came here thinking I was something he gave up. I needed him to understand that I was something he lost. There's a difference, and now he understands it." Alexander looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said quietly. "There is a difference." She looked at the account in front of her. She looked back at him. "I found an error in the merchant invoice from September," she said. "Minor, worth correcting." He looked at her. Something crossed his face, the specific expression she had seen twice before, and was beginning to understand, was Alexander Sterling's version of being undone by something he hadn't expected. "Of course you did," he said. He went back to his study. She went back to the accounts. She was smiling again. The actual smile, not the managed one. She was getting better at noticing the difference. She was getting better at noticing the difference, and the difference in the weeks that followed. Edward's visit became increasingly difficult to ignore because it showed up everywhere. In the way she reached for the account books in the morning, with the specific satisfaction of someone doing work that was genuinely hers. In the way she moved through the Sterling household, with the ease of a person who had stopped waiting for permission to belong. In the way she sat across from Alexander at dinner and had conversations that were not managed, not performed, not shaped for anyone's comfort, conversations that went where they went and ended when they ended and left her with the specific aliveness of genuine exchange. She had not known what she was missing until she stopped missing it. October came with the particular crispness of a New York autumn that was nothing like Virginia's, sharper and more decisive, as if the season up here meant to be taken seriously. The Halcourt estate visit was scheduled for the second week, and Clara spent the first week preparing for it with the same thoroughness she brought to everything, which meant that by the time they drove the 40 miles north to Halcourt's Green on a Tuesday morning, she knew more about the property than its deed recorded, and more about its people than any solicitor's report had managed. She also knew something she had not known 3 weeks ago. She was in considerable trouble. She had tried to account for, it had literally opened a page in her private notation book, and attempted to list the variables the way she'd have listed an account discrepancy to identify the source and the scope and the appropriate corrective action. The exercise had failed completely, which was useful in its own way, because it confirmed that the situation was not accountable in the standard sense. She was not going to think about it during the estate visit. She had work to do. Chog. Aldous met them at the gate. He was 68, built like a man who had spent 40 years in weather with the specific dignity of someone who had served something he believed in and had no interest in apologizing for that. He looked at Alexander with the careful assessment of a man deciding whether a person deserved the trust they were being offered. He looked at Clara with something that was more complicated, a kind of recognition she didn't immediately understand. "Mrs. Sterling," he said. "Mr. Aldous," she said. "I've heard a great deal about your work here." "Have you?" he said. It was not quite a question. "From the correspondence," she said. "The Halcourts mention you in nearly every letter they've written in the last year. That kind of consistency tells me something." He looked at her. "What does it tell you?" he said. "That you're the reason this place is what it is," she said. "Not just what's been planted and when. The quality of the decisions. That comes from someone who understands the land the way it takes 30 years to understand it." He was quiet for a moment. "You read accounts?" he said. "I read everything," she said. "But yes, primarily accounts." "You can read that in accounts," he said. "You can read almost anything in accounts," she said, "if you know what you're looking for." He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at Alexander. "She's not wrong," he said to Alexander, as if this were possibly surprising. "She rarely is," Alexander said. "I've stopped being surprised by it." Aldous made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in that direction. "Come on then," he said. "I'll show you the North Field first." Sod. He showed them everything. Not the abbreviated version that estate tours usually were, the strategic presentation of the best features at the best angles designed to produce an impression rather than an understanding. He showed them the North Field with its drainage problem that had been managed for 20 years with a particular channeling system he had designed himself. He showed them the root cellar with the temperature problem that required specific stacking arrangements to compensate. He showed them the eastern fence line that needed replacing. Next spring, the mill wheel that was 3 years from requiring significant repair, the tenant cottage whose chimney drew badly in the north wind. He showed them the problems. Clara understood immediately what that meant. He was not selling them the estate. He was deciding whether to trust them with it. She asked questions about each problem, not the questions of someone calculating repair costs, but the questions of someone trying to understand the full picture. Why had the drainage channeling been designed that way and not another? What made the temperature compensation work in the root cellar? What the north wind did to the chimney draw and what had been tried to address it? Aldous answered all of them. By the third hour he was answering before she finished asking. Alexander walked beside her and said very little, which she had come to understand was his way of operating in situations where he was gathering information. He listened with his full attention and saved his speech for when it would do the most work. At the mill wheel, he said to Aldous, "What would you need to do the repair right before the 3 years run out?" Aldous looked at him. "Materials and one good carpenter," he said. "The design is sound. It just needs new components in the right sequence." "I know a carpenter in the city," Alexander said. "He built the mechanism for the Sterling warehouse loading dock. If I send him out in the spring, would you be willing to work with him?" Aldous looked at him for a long moment. "You'd send your city carpenter up here for a mill wheel," he said. "I'd send the right person for the job," Alexander said. "That's what the job requires." Clara watched Aldous receive that. She watched him look at Alexander with the specific look of someone who has been testing for something and has found the answer he needed. "I'd work with him," Aldous said. Margaret Halcourt was waiting at the main house. The kitchen garden was everything James had promised. It was extensive, organized with the particular logic of someone who had been thinking about production and complementary planting and soil rotation for decades, and which Clara walked through with Margaret for 40 minutes, learning about decisions that had been made 30 years ago and were still shaping what grew here today. "You're taking notes," Margaret said. Clara looked at her notebook. "I take notes on everything that matters," she said. "I'll want to remember this correctly." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "You're going to keep it," she said. "The garden." "I'm going to learn it," Clara said. which is different from keeping it. Keeping suggests it stays the same. I want to understand it well enough to let it become what it wants to become. Margaret looked at her. My husband would have liked you, she said. I think I would have liked him, Clara said. He built something that knows what it is. That's rare. They went inside for tea. At the table, Margaret said, The sale will go through. It was not a question. We hope so, Clara said. It will, Margaret said. James and Anne have already decided. I decided this morning. She looked at Clara directly. I want you to know something. When we set the condition about a married buyer, it was because my husband didn't trust a single man to value the estate as a home rather than an investment. He didn't trust that a man alone would understand what it meant to have something you were building for rather than building toward. She paused. He was right to set the condition. He was not right about why it mattered. Clara waited. It doesn't matter because of the marriage, Margaret said. It matters because of the person. And I'm telling you that the person I would trust with this land is sitting across from me right now. She looked at Clara. Not at Alexander, at Clara. Clara held her gaze. I won't let you down, she said. I know, Margaret said. That's why I'm telling you. They were an hour south of Halcourt's Green on the return drive when Alexander said, She told you the sale was certain. Yes, Clara said. Before we left. At tea, she said. He was quiet for a moment. What did she say? He said. Clara told him. He was quiet for longer this time. She said the person she trusted was you, he said. Yes, she said. Not us, he said. She said the marriage wasn't the point, Clara said. The person was. He was looking at the road. She's right, he said. Clara looked at him. It was your approach with Aldous, she said. The carpenter offer. That mattered. You set it up, he said. You spent 3 weeks learning everything about that estate, so that when we got there I knew what to look for, and Aldous knew we were looking. We both prepared, she said. You prepared more, he said. I work differently than you, she said. That's not a hierarchy, it's a partnership. He turned to look at her. It was the first time she had used that word. She had not planned to use it. It had come out because it was the accurate description of what the last month had been, and Clara Bennett did not substitute inaccurate words for accurate ones, regardless of the personal implications of the accurate ones. She looked back at the road. We should plan the formal signing, she said. Mr. Graves will need at least 2 weeks to finalize the documents. Yes, Alexander said. He said nothing else. But for the rest of the drive, his attention had a different quality than it had had going north that morning. She noticed. She filed it in the category of things she was not examining until she had finished everything else. That category was getting full. The trouble arrived on a Thursday. Not Edward this time. Something larger and faster and considerably more dangerous in the form of Mr. Graves arriving at the Sterling house at 7 in the morning with the specific expression of a man who had received information that could not wait and did not improve with waiting. Clara was in the writing room. She heard him arrive, heard the low urgent exchange with Mrs. Grant, and came out before he was shown in. Mr. Graves, she said. What's happened? He looked at her. He looked past her to see if Alexander was nearby. Tell me, she said. Whatever it is. He told her. There was a rumor moving through the New York financial community. It had started as far as Graves could trace it from a conversation at the exchange 2 days earlier, and it had moved with the specific speed of a thing people found credible, which meant it was either true or constructed to sound true by someone who knew what credible sounded like. The rumor was the Sterling accounts were fraudulent. The bookkeeper theft had been discovered not because Clara had found it, but because Alexander had orchestrated it, had been skimming from his own accounts, and using the bookkeeper as a convenient explanation when someone started asking questions. The rumor further stated that the Halcourt sale was being executed under fraudulent representations, and that Alexander Sterling's personal accounts were significantly less healthy than publicly stated. Clara stood very still. She asked 3 questions. She asked who had been at the exchange conversation. Graves named 2 men, one she didn't know, one she recognized from the correspondence. A man named Hartley, who had a business dispute with Alexander from 2 years ago that had been settled but not apparently forgotten. She asked how far the rumor had spread. Graves said it had reached at least 6 of the major financial families and was moving. She asked if Alexander knew. Not yet, Graves said. I came here first because... He stopped. He looked at her. Because you'll know what to do with it. She looked at him. You came to me first, she said. You'll know what to do, he said again, simply, like it was obvious. She turned. Mrs. Grant, she said. Mrs. Grant appeared from the direction of the kitchen. Send for Mr. Sterling, Clara said. Tell him Mr. Graves is here and it's urgent, and then bring tea to the study. This is going to take a while.
Matin.
Alexander came down in 4 minutes. He was dressed, but his hair was not quite in order, which was the only sign that she had seen of him not being entirely composed, and she registered it and said nothing about it. She told him quickly without softening exactly what Graves had told her. He listened. When she finished, his face was doing the thing it did when he was working through something significant, the particular stillness of a man who was processing, rather than reacting, sorting information into categories before responding. Hartley, he said. You're not surprised, she said. I'm not surprised it came from that direction, he said. I'm surprised by the timing. He looked at Graves. The Halcourt sale finalizes in 2 weeks. Yes, Graves said. He's trying to stop it, Alexander said. If the rumor reaches the Halcourts before the signing, it will, Clara said. Information like this moves in one direction. We can't stop it reaching them. We can only control what they believe when it does. Both men looked at her. The rumor has 2 parts, she said. The bookkeeper fraud and the claim that the accounts aren't healthy. The first part is easy to disprove. I documented the bookkeeper situation completely. I have the original accounts, the pattern, the timeline. It's documented clearly. Anyone who reads it will see that the discovery was straightforward accounting work, not cover story. She paused. The second part, the account health, that's the more dangerous one because it's not specific enough to be easily disproved. You can't prove a negative. No, Alexander said. But you can make the positive case, she said. Not defensively. The accounts opened, not in response to the rumor. Proactively. She looked at him. You'd be showing your books to the people who matter before Hartley's version reaches them, which means they receive the truth first and the rumor second, and the order matters. Alexander was quiet. Showing my books to the financial community, he said. To 3 specific people, she said. The ones whose opinion drives the others. If those 3 have seen the accounts and found them sound, the rumor has nowhere to go. She looked at him. Mrs. Alderton is one. She doesn't like you, which makes her credible. If she's seen the books and believes them, people will believe her. Who are the other 2? He said. She named them. Both from the Halcourt dinner, both with the specific social position that made their endorsement valuable precisely because it was not easily given. And the Halcourts themselves, she said, before anyone else. Margaret needs to hear it from us with the documentation before she hears a version from the street. You want to call on Margaret today? He said. I want to call on Margaret this morning, she said. He looked at her. The accounts are clean, he said. You've been through all of them. Every line, she said. And you'd stake your credibility on that, he said. She looked at him directly. I already have, she said. By marrying into this household and managing these accounts, my name is on this arrangement. If the accounts are fraudulent, my judgment is fraudulent. She paused. They're not. I'll say that in any room Hartley's rumor has reached. Alexander was very still. He looked at her for a long moment, a different kind of looking than she was used to from him. Not the professional assessment of a capable partner, not the careful attention of a man who valued her work. Something more direct, something that had less management in it than anything she had seen from him. "All right," he said. He looked at Graves. "Send notes to Mrs. Alderton and the 2 names my wife has given you. Request meetings today if possible. Frame it as account review, not in response to any rumor, simply as a standard review we've been planning." "Yes, sir," Graves said. "And prepare the documentation," Alexander said. "Full account history. The bookkeeper situation documented completely with Mrs. Sterling's analysis attached." Graves left. Clara was already at her writing room desk. She worked for 2 hours without stopping. When she was finished, she had produced a 12-page account summary that documented the Sterling finances with the specific clarity of someone who had been through every ledger and understood every line. She had included a timeline of the bookkeeper discovery, her methodology, and her conclusions. She had attached 3 pages of the original ledgers with her annotations. She brought it to Alexander at 9:30. He read all 12 pages. He turned the last page and looked at her. "This is—" He stopped. "Thorough," she said. "I was going to say the clearest account summary I have ever read," he said. "Thorough is more useful than clear," she said. He looked at her. "It's both," he said. They called on Margaret Halcourt at 11. Margaret received them in her New York townhouse. She kept a residence in the city for the winter months, with the expression of a woman who had heard something that morning and was deciding how to handle it. "Sit down," she said. Not unkindly, with the specific efficiency of someone who was going to deal with a thing directly. "You've heard something," Clara said. "This morning," Margaret said. "From Mrs. Hartley." Mrs. Hartley, the wife, of course. "We came to show you the accounts," Clara said. She set the 12 pages on Margaret's table. "Not because of what you heard, because you're about to transfer your family's estate into our management, and you deserve to make that decision with complete information." Margaret looked at the pages. She looked at Clara. "You prepared this today," she said. "This morning," Clara said, "before coming here." "We came here first," Clara said. "Before the other meetings, because your decision matters more than anyone else's." Margaret picked up the pages. She was not an accountant, but she was a woman who had managed a complex estate for 40 years, and the specific intelligence that required was showing. Now she read carefully, asking 2 questions which Clara answered with the corresponding ledger page references she had memorized before leaving the house. Margaret put the pages down. She looked at Clara. "The person who told me this rumor," she said that you were placed in this household specifically to manage Alexander Sterling's public reputation, that the marriage was designed to create the appearance of propriety around fraudulent accounts. Clara looked at her steadily. "The marriage was designed," she said. "That's true. It was designed to fulfill the condition for the Halcourt sale and to address a genuine need Alexander had for capable household management." She held Margaret's gaze. "What it has become is something neither of us designed. But I'm not going to claim that the original arrangement was something other than what it was." Margaret was very still. "You're telling me the truth about something that could damage you," she said. "I'm always telling you the truth," Clara said. "If I stopped now, you'd know anyway." Alexander, who had been silent since they sat down, said, "Mrs. Halcourt, whatever you decide about the sale, I want you to know that the estate will be maintained as your husband intended. Not because it's a condition of the purchase, because it's the right thing to do." He paused. "Aldous has my word." Margaret looked at him. "Aldous," she said. "He showed us every problem in that estate," Alexander said. "Every failing, every limitation, everything that was going to cost money and effort. He showed us what it actually was, not what it looked like." He paused. "That kind of honesty deserves to be matched." Margaret sat for a long moment. She picked up the 12 pages again. She looked at one specific page, the bookkeeper timeline, Clara's annotations clear in the margins. Your wife found this, she said to Alexander. 4 days after we arrived in New York, he said. And documented it, Margaret said. Before anyone else noticed, Alexander said. Margaret set the pages down. The sale proceeds, she said. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Mrs. Halcourt. Margaret, she said. I think we're past formalities. She looked at Clara. The person who sent Mrs. Hartley to me this morning underestimated you considerably. Most people do, Clara said. Yes, Margaret said. I imagine they do. She stood, which signaled the end of the meeting. I'll write to Mrs. Alderton this afternoon. She'll want to hear what I found in these accounts. Clara looked at her. You don't have to, she started. I know I don't have to, Margaret said with a slight smile that was the most warmth Clara had seen from her. I'm choosing to. She walked them to the door. At the door, she put her hand briefly on Clara's arm, a gesture that was entirely personal and not performed. What your husband said to Aldous at the mill wheel, Margaret said quietly. That's what James was watching for. That one thing. She paused. He saw it. I know, Clara said. So did Aldous, Margaret said. He told me last night. She closed the door. Clara stood on the step for a moment. Alexander stood beside her. Mrs. Alderton this afternoon, he said. Mrs. Alderton at 2, she said. And then the other 2 tomorrow morning, in that order. He nodded. They walked toward the carriage. Clara, he said. She stopped. What you said in there, he said, about what the arrangement has become. She turned. She looked at him on the step in the October air in the specific clear light of a Thursday morning that was going to be a long and productive day. I said it because it was true, she said. I know, he said. He stopped. He started again. I'm glad you said it. She looked at him. So am I, she said. She got in the carriage. She was not smiling. She was doing something more specific than smiling. She was deciding, not in the dramatic, conclusive way she had made the decision to attend the Whitmore party, or the decision to accept the Thursday meeting, or the decision to review the accounts at breakfast. This was the slower kind of deciding, the kind that happened in the background of everything else accumulating through weeks of evidence and moments and the specific private recalibration of someone who had started in one place and found themselves somewhere they had not expected. She had not expected this. She was done being surprised by it. She had 12 pages of account documentation in her bag. 2 meetings tomorrow, a Halcourt estate sale finalizing in 2 weeks, and a household that was quietly and entirely hers. She had also, though she had not said it yet, considerably more than that. She was going to say it. Not today. Today had enough in it. But she was going to say it. She was a woman who said true things. And this she had finally admitted to herself somewhere between the mill wheel and the carriage ride home, and a 12-page account summary written in 2 hours before breakfast was the truest thing she had. She was going to say it, and the distance between that decision and the saying of it turned out to be occupied by 2 financial meetings, a Halcourt estate signing, and Edward Whitmore doing the one thing she had not predicted. The meetings with Mrs. Alderton's 2 recommended contacts happened Friday morning as planned. Clara brought the 12 pages and her own presence, and the specific quality of someone who was not managing a crisis, but simply presenting facts to people who deserved them. Both men, one a shipping merchant, one a land factor, read the accounts with the careful attention of people who understood what they were reading, asked the right questions, received the right answers, and left the meetings with the specific expression of people who had expected one thing and encountered another. Mrs. Alderton had already spoken to both of them before the meetings. Clara found this out from the land factor who mentioned it in passing. At the end, Mrs. Alderton said your account work was the most thorough she'd seen from anyone not professionally trained, and she received it with the composure she brought to most things, while internally registering that Margaret Halcourt's letter and Mrs. Alderton's telephone calls had moved faster than the rumor, which was exactly the outcome she had needed and had not been certain of. By Friday afternoon, the Hartley rumor had nowhere to go. Information that met organized opposition early lost its momentum. She had known that from 7 years of managing situations that could become crises if she let them develop speed. She had not let this one develop speed. Alexander came to the writing room at 4 o'clock with the particular expression of a man who had been receiving updates all day and had finally assembled the full picture. "Graves says the rumor is dead," he said. "It will resurface in some form," she said. "Hartley will try again, but not before the Halcourt signing and not with the same story." "You were 2 days ahead of him the entire time," Alexander said. "I was 1 day ahead," she said. "That was enough." He stood in the doorway for a moment. "What do you need?" he said. "Tonight. You've been working since 6 this morning." She looked at her accounts. She put down her pen. "I need dinner," she said. "And I need to not talk about Hartley or the accounts or the Halcourt sale for at least 2 hours." He looked at her. "I can arrange that," he said. "Good," she said. Dinner was the best meal they'd had in the month she'd been in New York, which was either Mrs. Grant responding to the week's stress by cooking with particular care, or Alexander having said something to Mrs. Grant before coming to the writing room. And Clara suspected the latter, but didn't ask because the meal was good, regardless of the reason, and she was too tired to manage an emotion about it. They talked about things that were not the accounts. She told him about her mother, who had taught her everything she knew about household management, and who had the specific skill of making a reduced income feel like abundance by understanding which things were worth spending money on and which were not. He told her about his father, who had built the first Sterling property from a failed tobacco farm and who had believed with the simple conviction of someone who didn't know enough to doubt it that any land could be made to produce something if you understood it well enough. He was right, Clara said. Usually, Alexander said. He was wrong about a property in Maryland that cost him 3 years, but he learned from it, and the next one was better. That's the right way to be wrong, she said. Yes, he said. He always said that mistakes were just expensive lessons. The problem was people who paid for the lesson and then didn't take it. She looked at her glass. Edward never took his lessons, she said. She said it not with bitterness, but with the specific observation of someone who had fully processed a thing and was now capable of seeing it clearly. He made the same errors in the same way over and over and called them bad luck. Some people prefer bad luck to accountability, Alexander said. It's easier, she said. Bad luck happens to you. Accountability requires participation. He looked at her. You've been doing this your whole life, he said. Taking the lesson, adjusting, moving. I didn't have the option not to, she said. When there's no one else to manage the situation, you learn to manage it, or nothing gets managed. You could have managed less, he said. Most people would have. She looked at him. I couldn't, she said. It's not in my character to do a thing halfway. No, he said. I've noticed. She smiled. He was looking at her with the expression that had no management in it, the direct, specific, entirely unconcealed expression of a man who was past the point where concealment served any purpose and had stopped trying. She looked at the tablecloth. The Halcourt signing is Tuesday, she said. Yes, he said. Mr. Graves has the documents ready. Yes, he said. And after Tuesday, she said, the 2-year clause becomes relevant. A pause. Yes, he said. His voice was different on this one. Careful. It does. She looked up. I want to discuss it, she said. He held her gaze. So do I, he said. Not tonight, she said. No, he agreed. Not tonight. Mrs. Grant brought the dessert course. They finished dinner talking about the Halcourt kitchen garden and Eleanor's planting philosophy, and whether the Sterling property in Virginia had soil worth developing, and the conversation was entirely ordinary and entirely genuine. And Clara went to bed that night thinking that ordinary and genuine was in fact the thing she had been looking for her entire life without knowing the name for it. Tuesday came. The signing happened in Mr. Graves's office with the formal efficiency of legal proceedings that had been thoroughly prepared and were therefore mercifully brief. Margaret and James Halcourt signed. Alexander signed. Clara signed as a witness, which was what the documents required, and which she did in her clear, consistent hand, and the Halcourt estate, Halcourt's Green 40 miles north, with its drainage channels and root cellar and mill wheel, 3 years from major repair, became sterling property. Margaret shook Alexander's hand. Then she turned to Clara and did something Clara had not expected. She took both Clara's hands in hers briefly, in the specific gesture of a woman who meant something with her hands, and said, "Take care of it." "I will," Clara said. "I know," Margaret said. They left the office. On the street outside, Alexander said, "Tuesday." "The 2-year clause?" she said. "Yes," he said. "Walk with me," she said. They walked, not toward the house. Away from it through the specific grid of a New York October morning with the air sharp and the city moving around them at its characteristic pace. She said, "When I set the 2-year dissolution clause, I was protecting against a situation I didn't understand yet. I was protecting against the possibility that the arrangement would be exactly what it looked like, a contract between two people who needed different things from each other and would go their separate ways when the needs were met." He walked beside her. He said nothing. She kept going. "The Halcourt acquisition is complete," she said. "The accounts are clean and documented. The household is running efficiently. Everything I was engaged to do has been done." She paused. "The clause is available." "Yes," he said. His voice was very controlled. She could hear the control in it. "I don't want to use it," she said. He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. She turned to look at him. "I'm not saying that because of the household," she said, "or the accounts, or the Halcourt estate, or any of the practical things that are going well. I'm saying it because the last month has been the first time in my life that I have been exactly who I am in every moment, without adjusting for anyone's requirements, and that has happened because of how you—" She stopped. She started again. "You listen," she said. "You don't manage. You give me the accounts, and you wait to see what I find, and you stand in the doorway after difficult conversations and ask if I am all right, not whether things are all right. You treat my judgment as information rather than as something to be managed." She looked at him directly. "I did not know that was available. I have not spent my life knowing that was available, and I am not willing to walk away from it because a contractual clause says I can." He was very still. She held his gaze. "Say something," she said. "I'm deciding," he said. "What are you deciding?" she said. "Whether to say what I've been not saying for 3 weeks," he said, "or whether the thing I've been not saying is adequately communicated by what you just said, and I should simply agree with all of it." She looked at him. "Say it," she said. He said, "I told my solicitor 3 weeks ago that the 2-year clause was the worst term I'd ever agreed to." She stared at him. "3 weeks ago?" she said. "Yes," he said. "That was the day after Mrs. Alderton called," he said. "I realized at the Alderton dinner that what I had was—" He stopped, started differently. "I have been managing things efficiently for 15 years. I am good at it. I find satisfaction in it. I did not expect to encounter something I was managing that changed the nature of what managing meant." He looked at her. "You changed what it meant. Because managing something that is also—" He stopped again. "Finish it," she said. "Loved," he said, "is not the same as managing something that is merely valuable. And I had not understood that distinction before because I had not had occasion to." The street moved around them. A cart passed. 2 women in conversation walked past without looking. The city went on being the city, indifferent and efficient, doing what it did, regardless of the 2 people standing in the middle of it, having the most important conversation either of them had had in years. Clara looked at him. She thought about a burned letter, about a party she had attended in her best dress to prove she wasn't destroyed, about conditions set across a desk and a handshake that felt like the first equal thing. About 12 pages of account documentation and a mill wheel and a kitchen garden and a man who waited in doorways. She thought, this is what choosing yourself actually looks like. Not absence, not independence from everyone. This. The right person on the right terms, chosen fully and without apology while remaining completely who you were. The 2-year clause, she said. Yes, he said. I'd like to dissolve it, she said. Not because the arrangement is ending, because the arrangement has become something the clause doesn't fit anymore. He looked at her. Agreed, he said. And replace it, she said, with something that reflects what it actually is. Also agreed, he said. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she said, I love you. She said it the way she said everything true plainly, without performance, in the specific direct tone of someone who had confirmed a fact and was stating it accurately. He said, I know. She stared at him. You know, she said. Mrs. Grant told me you'd been listing things in your notation book 2 weeks ago, he said. She saw the page from the doorway. She described it as... He paused. She said it looked like an account of a situation you were trying to resolve mathematically. Clara pressed her hand to her face. Mrs. Grant saw the page, she said. She told me the same morning. And you said nothing, she said. You weren't ready to say it yet, he said. I was waiting. She looked at him. You were waiting, she said. I've been waiting since Tuesday in Richmond, he said. A little longer didn't seem significant. She dropped her hand. She looked at him with the expression that was not quite the composed public face, and not quite the actual smile, something between them. Something she had not worn for anyone before, because it required the specific combination of being entirely seen and entirely safe. I love you, she said again. The first time I said it correctly. The second time is for emphasis. He reached out and took her hand. Her hand, the one that had burned Edward Whitmore's letter and shaken Alexander Sterling's across a desk in Richmond and written 12 pages of account documentation before breakfast and signed a property transfer an hour ago. He held it with both of his. I thought I was acquiring a capable wife, he said. I was wrong. She looked at him. What were you acquiring? She said. Someone who makes me want to be better at the things that matter, he said. Which are not the things I thought mattered before I met you. He paused. Also, the best accountant I have encountered in 15 years of business. She laughed. It was a real laugh, the sound of a person who was entirely present in a moment and finding it genuinely funny and not managing any part of the response. He smiled. Not the social smile she had seen in parlors, the actual one. She was going to remember that smile for the rest of her life, and she knew it. The Winter Ball of 1816 was held at the Alderton House on the 15th of December, and was by every account the most significant social event of the New York season, which was saying something, because New York in 1816 understood significant social events as a civic responsibility. Clara wore a dress she had chosen herself, dark blue, without excessive ornament, with the specific quality of a woman who understood that confidence needed no amplification, and that the best thing a dress could do was get out of the way of the person wearing it. Alexander was beside her, not behind her, not slightly ahead in the proprietary way of men who escorted women beside her, which she had noticed from the first event they attended together, and which had never once varied. The room was a full accounting of New York's winter society, and Clara moved through it the way she moved through accounts. She knew where everything was. She knew what needed attention. She knew the history of each element and what it connected to. She was 3 conversations into the evening when she felt the specific change in room temperature that announced Edward Whitmore. She had not known he was in New York. She turned. He was across the room in conversation with Hartley, the man whose rumor she had dismantled in October. He had not seen her yet, or was performing not seeing her, and she was deciding whether to acknowledge the performance or let it be when Mrs. Alderton appeared at her elbow. Edward Whitmore, Mrs. Alderton said, in the specific tone she used for things she found distasteful. Yes, Clara said. He and Hartley have been in conversation for 20 minutes, Mrs. Alderton said. which is not coincidental. No, Clara said. It isn't. He's going to come to you, Mrs. Alderton said, before the evening's over. Whitmore doesn't leave rooms without making all the moves he intends to make. I know, Clara said. Do you want me to? No, Clara said. Thank you. I'll handle it. Mrs. Alderton looked at her. You always handle it, she said. Yes, Clara said. I do. She moved through the room. She did not wait for Edward to come to her. She found him at the 40-minute mark when he was between conversations, and therefore had no social cover. And she crossed to him with the specific, purposeful directness that was her natural mode, and which Edward had always found disconcerting, because he preferred to control the terms of encounters. Edward, she said. He turned. Something moved across his face. She had gotten good at reading the unmanaged versions of his expressions, and this one was the specific expression of a man who has been planning something and has had the plan arrive before he was ready. Clara, he said. You look well. I know, she said. You're working with Hartley. He opened his mouth. Don't, she said pleasantly. I don't have the patience for the version where you explain why it's something else. She looked at him directly. Whatever you and Hartley are planning next, I want you to understand something first. Clara, the Sterling accounts are clean, she said. I made them clean. Every document is in order. The Halcourt sale is completed, and there are 3 people in this room who have reviewed my work personally and will say so publicly if required. She paused. You can try again, but you will need a different strategy, and you will need to account for the fact that I will find it before it develops speed and dismantle it before it does damage. Because that is what I do, and I have become very good at it. He was very still. This isn't about the accounts, he said. His voice was different, stripped of the performance the way it had been when he said you didn't love me in the front parlor. She could hear what was actually underneath it. I know, she said. Then what do you want me to? Stop, she said, quietly, not harshly. Stop all of it. The Hartley arrangement, the rumors, whatever comes next. Stop it and go back to Virginia and manage your own estate. She looked at him. Edward, you let me go. You chose that. And everything that happened after was the right consequence of the right decision for both of us. She paused. I am not the person you decided I was. But I'm also not the person you want back. What you want back is a function, something that managed your household and solved your problems, and didn't require you to see it as a person. She held his gaze. That function doesn't exist anymore. I am a person. I have been a person the whole time, and the person I am is not available to you. He looked at her for a long time. The room moved around them. She waited. He said, You'll never find better than me. He said it the way he had said it at the Whitmore party, not with the smirk, not this time, but with the specific quality of a man who had believed it once and was now saying it because the alternative was to admit it was never true. She looked at him. She thought about Alexander in the doorway, about 2 hands on hers on a New York street, about someone who makes me want to be better at the things that matter, about love stated plainly because it was accurate, which was the only reason she ever stated anything. I didn't need to find better than you, she said. I needed to find myself. She held his gaze. I did. You helped. That's the most generous thing I can say about your role in any of this, and I mean it genuinely. She left him there. She did not look back. She crossed the room to where Alexander was in conversation with James Halcourt and the shipping merchant from the Friday meetings, and she came to stand beside him, and he shifted slightly to include her in the conversation, without breaking it, the specific unconscious movement of a person who was aware of another person. The way you were aware of your own breathing automatically, completely, without having to think about it. She stood beside him and listened to the conversation and thought this. Not the Whitmore estate in Virginia. Not the role of useful woman in someone else's life. Not the performance of a person who made things easier for other people at her own expense. This room, This city, this household, this work, this man who moved to include her without thinking about it, because including her was simply what he did. This was what she had burned a letter toward. This was what she had walked out a door to find. James Halcourt left the conversation, and it was just the two of them and the shipping merchant, who excused himself shortly after for the supper table. Alexander looked at her. "Whitmore," he said. "Handled," she said. "I saw you cross to him," he said. "You didn't wait." "I never wait for things I can address directly," she said. "No," he said. "You don't." He looked at her. "Are you all right?" She looked at him. "I'm exactly all right," she said. "For the first time in longer than I can calculate, I am exactly all right." He took her hand. Right there in the middle of the Alderton Winter Ball, in the specific, unself-conscious way of someone who was not performing anything for anyone, he took her hand. She held it. "He said it again," she said. "You'll never find better than me." "What did you say?" he said. "That I didn't need to find better," she said. "I needed to find myself." He was quiet for a moment. "And did you?" he said. She looked around the room at Mrs. Alderton, who caught her eye and gave her the specific nod of one capable woman, acknowledging another. At the Halcourts across the room, James's arm around Anne's shoulders, Margaret, in conversation with someone who was clearly being offered her genuine opinion about something. At the accounts she would go home to tomorrow, the ones that were hers and clean, and would stay that way because she had built the system that kept them that way. At the estate 40 miles north that she was going to visit in spring to learn what her mother had planted and where. She looked at Alexander. "Yes," she said. "I found her." He looked at her with the expression that had nothing managed in it. "I know," he said. "I was there when she arrived." She held his hand and looked at the room and felt the specific, grounded, entirely unperformed satisfaction of a woman who had set her own terms and met them, who had looked at a burning letter and chosen to walk toward something instead of away from it, who had sat across a desk in Richmond and said, "I have conditions," and meant everyone who had learned a lesson at 17 that she had been taking ever since. Numbers were honest. They told you what was true, and the truest account she had ever produced, the one with no discrepancies, no managed entries, nothing smoothed over or softened or made convenient for someone else's reading, was the account of her own life as she was living it now. Every line of it was accurate. Every line was hers. Edward Whitmore had called her a memory. He had been wrong about what she was wrong about what she was worth, and wrong about what she would become. But he had not been wrong that she was choosing something. She had. She was choosing it still. Every morning, every account, every moment of standing exactly as tall as she was, without apology. Clara Bennett. Clara Sterling. But Clara Bennett, underneath it, always her father's name, and her own work, and her mother's lessons. And 7 years of honest accounts had walked into a room to prove she wasn't destroyed. She had been right. She was not destroyed. She was, for the first time, and for keeps, entirely and completely built.